Good to go. All right, good morning, everyone. I'm Keenan, our education assistant here at the museum, and before we get started, I just want to let everyone know a big thank you to local roasters for providing our coffee here this morning. They donated their coffee, Peru Incawasi, which is a natural processed coffee, so let me know what you think of that. Also, a heads up to everyone, and I apologize in advance, we have a really big field trip coming up today. And then we're also getting our carpets cleaned later, so we have to flip around this space and get everything cleaned up after the program. So we will need to wrap up by 10 o'clock to get everything cleaned up. So I appreciate you all understanding that. Also, the Mock Gala is coming up on April 26th, and tickets are on sale for that. So get your tickets. It'll be a lot of fun, a formal evening with dinner, drinks, live music, a silent auction, and those in attendance will be the first to see a brand new temporary exhibit of World War I art called Over There, Over Here. Our next Coffee with the Curator will be May 15th with Dr. Lewis Elliott, Associate Professor of British Imperial History at the University of Oklahoma. Dr. Elliott will be giving a talk called God Always Saves Endeavor, Competing Definitions of Freedom and the Twilight Years of British Slavery. Dr. Elliott writes, the concept of anti-slavery in Britain matured in the late 18th century from a radical fantasy into a legitimate political position. With that came an intense debate over the place of Black people in imperial society, should slavery be abolished. Yet this discourse rarely, if ever, included Black people and certainly never engaged with the enslaved. But those enslaved people, in fact, had their own ideas about their place in a non-slave-holding British Empire. This talk examines these two divergent expectations of a post-emancipation British Empire. Also, so you know, our next Senior Wednesday is May 7th, when Rex Buchanan, the former director of the Kansas Geological Survey, will be giving a free talk here, sponsored by Humanities Kansas, called Petroglyphs of the Kansas Smoky Hills, about sandstone carvings in the middle of our home state, the people who made them, and what those carvings can tell us about them. I'm going to pass it off to Kristen, our marketing director, because she knows our speaker very well here today. Oh yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Gotta get mic'd up so the people online can hear me. Hi everyone, as Keenan said, my name is Kristen. I'm the marketing director here at the museum. As some of you know, I've been here for quite a while. I started as a volunteer in 2012, and would you like to take a guess who interviewed me to become a volunteer when I first volunteered here? Yes, Jillian did. Would you like to know whose job I took? Yes, I got the email from Jillian, who was the education manager and volunteer coordinator at the time, to the volunteers. Actually, 5 minutes after I had turned in my very last paper at Newman University, and I was like, I might just apply for that job. And here I am today. So I've known Jillian for quite a while. As some of you might have seen in our email, Jillian was actually the one who first started the Coffee with the Curator program. And I think you gave the very first Coffee with the Curator, right? Yes. There's some photos from that. So kind of a bit of a full circle moment here. So I'm going to read Jillian's biography here. Jillian is a Wichita-based historical fiction author as well as a local business owner. She has a master's degree in public history from Wichita State University. She once worked in our museum's very own education department, and her books emphasize the bonds between animals and people. Please give a warm welcome to Jillian.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, everyone, for having me. Can we switch the computer over to this one?
Yep.
And you're going to see a really cute slide first thing.
And do you want this one?
I'm okay with this one. Yeah, good deal.
I'm going to minimize it for just a second. So I can turn it over. You might have to watch it screen.
Let's try it. Hi, friends.
We're going to have to.
I think we can put it into presentation mode right here.
Sorry, folks.
Technical difficulties, we'll get there.
Uh-oh, where'd it go? Which direction? This
Hi, Kayla. Everyone say hi to Sedgwick County Zookeeper Kayla, who cares for the black rhino at the Sedgwick County Zoo. We love that, don't we?
Okay, so this one's gonna go. All right, and we're just gonna make it big. There we go. And then it's also on the screen.
Still
Oh, got a thingy. Oh, shoot, I did the wrong one, sorry. Still figuring it out, guys, sorry. But I think I need this one over there, and then that one over here. There it is. Okay, so this one's for you, and that one's. Where's my mouse?
We'll get there, I promise.
Yep.
I talk really fast, so we'll be able to get through before 10 for sure.
And then I need to full screen that. That full screen down there.
Yay, we did it. Hi, friends. I'm Jillian, author of the historical fiction novel, The Rhino Keeper. My book is set mostly in 18th century Europe, during a time when the state of Kansas wasn't even established, and there wasn't a single brick building or street in this beautiful place that we call home. So how is my book a Kansas story? How is the story of a Dutch ship captain who traveled around the Horn of Africa on a 3-masted ship with a baby rhino in tow, the story of the first animal celebrity who never set foot anywhere near this continent or near Kansas, the story of art that exists in European museums, of royals, of normal people who lived in the 1700s, a Kansas story. Because without Kansas, this book and my author career simply would not exist. I'm going to tell you how. That's me in various stages of my life. In the top left, you can see me holding one of my 4-H lambs in a small unincorporated community outside of Fort Scott called Hyattville. Below that, my parents cheering me on after I cheered at the 2004, I'm dating myself, state championship basketball game for the Fort Scott Tigers. To the right of that, one of my many sheep shows at the Kansas Junior Livestock Show. I also spent many hot September weekends showing sheep and goats at the Hutchinson State Fair. That green mulch and the smell of livestock barns are exactly the same as they were 20 years ago. On the far right, that's me cheering again in college. For my undergraduate, I went to a small liberal arts school called McPherson College and graduated with a double major in history and communication. In the middle, that's me and my husband, who met in Wichita the very first day that I moved here for graduate school. We chose Kansas as our home with our child for so many reasons, and it was because of my husband and child that I wrote the book that I did. Everything that culminated with my experiences here, living here, being educated here, knowing people here, led me to an international story that became a best-selling novel, The Rhino Keeper. You see, livestock was my hobby. I loved every sweaty summer lanolin-smelling moment in southeast Kansas when I was a 4-H kid showing sheep and goats. I was there for my lambs' births in January and February, and I was there for their auction at the fair when I had to learn how to say goodbye. I learned how to shear a sheep and measure food, and I did have to learn how to put them in the ground when they died unexpectedly, and mourn the loss of an animal that I loved. I helped my ewes give birth and showed their babies at the fair the next year. I got fungus on my arms Dirt under my nails, sweat and scars on my back, I worked hard to win trophies, ribbons, and learn how to connect with an animal, only to learn in turn how to let it go. Those 6 or 7 years I spent in 4-H changed my life. I still have that box of trophies in the basement. And after my livestock showing days were over, I went to college. In McPherson, at a cheerleading and newspaper scholarship, I found an unexpected love of history. My favorite professor there was Ken Yan, who still teaches there today, and he helped me learn how to research and write and find importance in small historical moments that are often overlooked. From there, I went on to grad school at Wichita State. I wanted to marry my two loves, public speaking and history. I combined my majors of comm and history and my love of museums and artifacts and obscure things from the past, and I met my husband and made a plan to stay here in Wichita. I worked here at the Museum of World Treasures for years. I gave tours, developed programs, dusted the T-Rex, studied the mummy x-rays, revamped the exhibits with the team, made a new best friend in Ron Bogard. I even gave the very first Coffee with the Curator talk. I begged my grandparents to come so that we could have just 2 people in the audience. And look at us today. They invited their friends, and soon the program took off. And life has sometimes a rambling way of finding purpose. We're going to fast forward a few years to 2020. My husband and 5-year-old daughter at that point in time were making our way home from a socially distanced wedding reception in Manhattan, Kansas, on our way back home to Wichita. We saw signs for Rolling Hills Zoo. Anybody ever been to Rolling Hills Zoo? Yep, I see lots of hands. Good. It was cold, and the only place that we could find to chill us, to warm up our bones from the chilling Kansas wind was the Rhino barn. And when I went inside, I saw an animal that absolutely changed my life. His name was Joya, and he passed in 2021. When I saw Joya, I felt like a bolt of lightning had struck me. He was unlike any animal I had ever seen, especially different from the African rhinos that I was used to seeing in movies and in zoos. I was literally awestruck. I asked tons of questions of the keepers, and the zookeeper in this room can tell you that my questions are literally never ending. I could not stop thinking about this species on the way home. You see, Joya is a greater one-horned rhino, also called an Indian rhino, and he's very different from the African ones, not to mention how absolutely massive he was. On the drive home, I pulled up the Wikipedia page for the species because that's just the kind of person that I am. And I read the entire thing out loud to my daughter and husband, who were probably sitting there going, why do we care about a rhino? Well, I cared about a rhino because I think it was my destiny to care about a rhino. At the very bottom of that Wikipedia page was a stub article. And that means it wasn't a very long Wikipedia article, and it was about Clara, the rhino. When I clicked that link, my arms rippled with goosebumps. That is the first image that I ever saw of Clara, the Indian rhino. From that moment on, I was captured, just as she was, held captive by her story. Clara was called the first animal celebrity. The Wikipedia article told me that she traveled Europe for nearly 20 years with her keeper, a man with the most terrible first name for a main character in a novel ever. His name is Douwe Vandermeer. I know, you'll see it spelled out later. She met peasants and queens and Empress Maria Theresa, King Louis XV, and I desperately wanted to read a novel about her, but there wasn't one. She was the subject of artists' paintbrushes and porcelain sculptures and coins and broadsides, and she was even in the background of the royalties' paintings. She was incredible. In Paris, when she was there, there was even a hairstyle called the Les Rhinoceros. I couldn't believe that there was only 2 picture books and 1 nonfiction book about her. I really wanted to read that novel, and my husband looked at me and said, well, maybe you should write it. Ha! Me? I'd forgotten how much I love history. I'd forgotten how to scratch that itch of my own. And for the next year, I started doing research. And I realized that she actually changed the history of rhinos in Europe. Here's how. Before Clara came to Europe, the bottom image was what most natural philosophers, they didn't even call them scientists back then, thought rhinos were like. The image was one of the first to go viral, if you will, Tens of thousands of woodcuts were printed from this. It's an incredible piece of art by one of my favorite artists named Albrecht Dürer. And if you look really closely, you can see the date on it. It says 1515. This is interesting because Albrecht Dürer never saw a rhino in real life. It's not totally wrong, is it? But you can see Joya's on the top there. The comparison's okay. Here's the real story. Albrecht Dürer never saw a rhino in real life, but he had a ship captain's description and a small sketch. The rhino that he got this information from had its legs chained together and drowned off the coast of Portugal. It was supposed to be a gift from one king to another, just as a lot of exotic animals were in the 18th century. The really sad part about that is Indian rhinos can swim. And if its legs wouldn't have been chained together, it likely would have made it to shore. So we have an entirely wrong image. Look at the dorsal horn. Look at the funny moon-cobbled skin. Look at the goofy toes. None of this quite makes sense if you look at it with Joya. And when Clara came, it was almost like a unicorn had come to town. Imagine seeing Dürer's image of a rhino your entire life, even as a child. That's what you learned about. And then all of a sudden you see this? Wait a minute, who's wrong? Is this rhino just strange looking? Or did Albrecht Dürer, one of the greatest animal illustrators of all time, not know what he was doing? Well, the reality was that most rhinos in captivity only lived about 6 months. Before Clara came to Europe, their lives were considered to be short and brutish. Some of them were even purposefully blinded because they couldn't control them. What I learned from that was that rhinos were most misunderstood. Not only in the way that they were presented to people, but in the way that they were treated. And you're probably wondering, wait, okay, she's in Europe, but you told us that she's an Indian rhino, so how did she get from India to Europe? Well, Clara, there is a baby, isn't she cute? Actually, that's the baby from Tanganyika who just left us. Clara used to live in Calcutta, which was then under Dutch control and was very shortly under British control after she left. And she got to Europe on a 3-masted ship. You have to understand, most people on 3-masted ships, probably 4 out of 10, did not survive the voyage. How are you going to take an extremely valuable animal around the Horn of Africa on a 3-masted ship on a 6-month sea voyage when she's also growing? She's a baby now, but how much food do you have to have for a 6-month-old rhino to survive that voyage? The answer is they had no idea. They had no idea how much food she was supposed to eat. They had no idea what they were supposed to feed her. And they had no idea that maybe giving her a bucket of ale a day was not the best idea. But hey, you know, she made it. She made it. There's no way that today you could pay a rhino keeper enough to put a rhino on a ship. No way. In fact, the rhino movers that exist today are extremely expensive. And you have to crate train a rhino for months and months in order for it to even step into that trailer. That is a journey that some rhinos don't ever even make. They just stay where they are because the difficulty of moving them from one place to the next is something that not a lot of zookeepers want to experience. Or the rhinos, they don't want to experience that either. So she gets out of Calcutta because she was the subject of dinner parties and she licked the plates clean by the end of the night, which is in the book, by the way, you must read it. And then she makes it to Europe. And by the time she makes it to Europe, she is an immediate celebrity. This was one of the first illustrations drawn of Clara. You can see that it is in the background of an incredible anatomy illustration that was done in Leiden, Holland. When she was drawn here, we have a contrast to what most people thought rhinos looked like and their behaviors. You can see her ears are very soft and docile. You can see her head is kind of downturned and her horn is rounded. In the past, people thought that rhinos were the mortal enemies of elephants and that they would eat a man whole. No, this shows not only a different way of looking at her, but a different essence of an animal like her. Now, some people still believe that rhinos are violent, charging beasts, and they can be. They have to defend themselves and they're young, and if you startle one with a gust of wind or a bird, which is really scary to rhinos, by the way, who are very skittish, then you might get trampled, for sure. But they will not eat a man at all. They will love to eat bananas from your hand. But rhinos, for the first time, were being seen as the docile and timid animals that they actually are. So, from here, Clara became a celebrity, and she had so many pieces of art made from her. And I have some of those on the back table if you would like to see them. These were basically meant to be ephemera. You can see the broadsides that come up. Those broadsides are basically meant to advertise that Clara is touring now. If you look, here, hold on, I'm gonna get my little pointer and show you. If you look up here, you can see the wagon that she traveled Europe in for 18 years. To my knowledge, and with all the research that I've done, I believe it's the first covered animal carriage. And it was 6 feet in diameter at the wheels. And if you've ever tried to move a large animal or even a medium-sized animal in the back of a trailer, you know how, kind of traumatic that can be sometimes. Well, imagine doing that and your trailer's being pulled by 12 oxen. So you're not only caring for a rhino, you're caring for a large team of animals that are pulling a 5,000-pound animal through the cobbled streets of Europe, through the alpine mountain passes, around the coast, and even down a barge, where she wasn't able to be in her carriage. She was just open air on a barge. Those types of things are the things that people saw. And her caretaker, Dowie, thought that he would take her on tour not only to educate people, but to do something that was crucial to the 18th century, to inspire wonder. The 18th century was all about, what can I learn? What do I need to know? People for the first time had free time. They knew how to read and write, and they were curious about the world around them. And believe you me, when she rolled into town, you wanted to pay your pennies, not only to see her, but to feed her, touch her, and see the behemoth of Job in the flesh. So Clara really became pretty popular. Oh, look at that cute little porcelain one. Cute. So her caretaker, there's his name. You see that? Right there. You see it? When we did audiobook auditions, all 65 people who auditioned for the audiobook pronounced his name differently. We had to have a meeting about how to say his name, and we did discover that we think that it is Dowie. However, I can't go back to 1740 and ask the guy, so, there you go. So you can see an illustration of him, one of very few that exists in the black and white. In my mind's eye, when I'm writing this book, he looks like Eddie Redmayne. So just keep that in your mind, okay? Just to add a little romance and spice to the book for you. But this guy was basically solo with Clara. He is the only person that we know specifically was documented to care for her. He lived from 1705 to 1775, and Clara, when she died in 1758, produced the last known record of him until his own death. The thing that is really astounding for me for that is this guy traveled all of Europe with her. He was a former VOC ship captain. A ship captain abandoned his entire career to care for a large animal and essentially become a circus director. But this was his only show, just her. No one else was with her. No animals came about afterward. It was just Clara, the traveling wonder beast. The answer for me was always why. And in fiction, I could delve into that a little more. See, Dowie didn't leave behind any written records, a land deed, a marriage certificate, that's it. Even his captain's log didn't have much information about Clara, which was really sad to me. If I owned a rhino, you better believe I would be writing about her every single day in my journal, but that's fine. So that meant that I had to fill in the gaps between fact and fiction, the gaps between how do you keep an animal alive for 18 years when she's the only one on the continent and all of the other ones have died in 6 months? The only answer that makes any sense to me was that he cared about her. Just as we have all had an animal that we care about. He must have been bonded to this animal so much so that after her own death, he disappeared. No more animals, no menagerie, no more traveling wonder shows. He just went back and lived a quiet life. So, I had this one character in Clara the Rhino. I had another character in Douwe van der Meer, and then I discovered this. You can see these incredible artistic drawings of Clara, and you can see there's people in the background. Do you see that little face? Oh, and my circle's on the wrong side, but do you see that little person? Here? Look at that face. And he appears twice? There's absolutely no way that that could be a coincidence, right? A little boy entered into the picture for me. I do not know his name. I do not know where he is from, but my imagination told me, how did a Dutch ship captain with no animal husbandry experience know how to take care of an Indian rhino? The answer was clear. He had to have a friend come with him from India who knew this creature inside and out. Rhinos like to bond with people. They know their own names. They come when they're called most of the time. They like to do commands for people with the reward of treats. And they know for a fact that when someone looks them in the eye and creates a caretaker bond with them, that they can trust that person. That person is that kid for me. His name in the book is Zubin. And I desperately wish I could tell you who he really is. I think I've done a pretty good job of telling his story of a person of color who was also brought around the Horn of Africa on a 3-masted ship, who didn't really have much choice or say in the matter, who all of a sudden appeared in Europe to an entirely new world and experienced things for the first time alongside the traveling wonder beast. You had people who were also displaced, which is the larger story behind this book of colonialism and what happens when exotic things are not exotic to the place that they came from. They're only seen as exotic to the places that they land. That undercurrent in this book is punctuated by him. And I've been told by many people that he is their favorite character. And in book clubs, I reveal something that my mother forced me to do. So if you want to do a book club, I can't spoil it for you right now, but if you want to do a book club, we'll delve a little deeper into Zubin's story. So I couldn't write a book without just, Clara and her ship captain caretaker. So I had to write a book based on art. And I had to create a map of the documented places and times using that art. Everybody wanted to draw Clara. She was paid large amounts of money for people to just sit there and draw her. And there's tons of those illustrations on the back table that I encourage you to go look at when I'm done. But basically what I had to do then was create a map of all of the pieces of art that I'd found in museums. I had to translate the word rhino into like 17 different languages and search all of the museum archives in order to know where she was and when. It actually became pretty easy for me. 1751, oh, here's an artist who drew her. And here's a city where he was. And I know exactly where she was because I can identify the background. Or the artist left a little bit of a note about where he saw her and how much he paid to draw this animal. But it wasn't those spots on this map that's coming up next that my best friend Annika made for me that's in the book. It wasn't the landing places here. It's actually the dotted lines in between. The dotted lines in between are where all of the adventure happened. Once again, imagine taking a rhino across the Alps. The Rhino Keeper in the room is literally shaking her head. She's like, no, thank you. I really don't want to do that. Imagine taking a rhino down a river. Imagine parading a rhino through a cobbled street where children have never even had the knowledge of world outside of their own neighborhood. And all of a sudden, they're seeing a 3-toed beast roll her pink-soled shoes down the path. Those types of things are what was in my brain. And also what was in my brain was, how the heck can I do this without meeting rhinos? The answer was I couldn't. Luckily, here in the state of Kansas, we actually have some incredible zoos that allow us to meet rhinos. You can have a rhino experience at both the Sedgwick County Zoo and at Tanganyika if you want to meet these guys. You will get slimy hands, I will warn you. They might kick mud on you when they get the zoomies. Yes, they totally get rhino zoomies. And if you're anything like me, and you're anything like the people in the 18th century who saw Clara for the first time, you're probably gonna go, wow, I had no idea. That's the point. That's the point of existence. The point of existence is to wow ourselves every once in a while. To say, what is that? To say, what am I looking at right now? To say, I got a slimy hand from a rhino who just ate a banana. Those types of experiences, even as adults, are ones that you'll never forget. I had to learn what their skin felt like. I had to learn what they smelled like. I had to learn how their mouths moved. I had to learn how they ran when they were in danger. I had to learn what their horns felt like. And I did that here in zoos in Kansas, both at Tanganyika and at the Sedgwick County Zoo. Now, the thing that I didn't expect, and I still just kind of step back in amazement sometimes, is when I go to the Sedgwick County Zoo now, and I see KJ the rhino out in his pen, and I shout his name, he will run at me making a peeping whistling noise that says, oh, hi, I remember you, you gave me a watermelon. Yes, I did. He knows his people. They are much like large dogs and horses. Their intelligence level isn't quite as much as an elephant, but they still have personalities, and they love just as deeply as people do. So I had to meet rhinos, I had to meet rhino keepers, and what the rhino keepers told me about this was the same thing that I always had thought, that there was no way that he could have kept Clara alive if he didn't love her, and if she didn't love him back. She would have died, not only of malnutrition because they were feeding her like 24 loaves of bread a day. Listen, we do what we can, okay? Or oranges, which can actually cause iron overload and makes rhinos die, even though they love them. They don't protect themselves from the things that you hand them when they want to eat it. They just eat it. They don't eat meat. They had to discover that early on, and that's actually in some of the pamphlets. If you wanted to feed her, they had a list of things that were appropriate, but if you wanted to blow your cigar smoke in her face, she would accept that very greedily. So we have all these strange things that rhinos are doing in the past that definitely don't happen today, but without this rhino touring Europe, the menageries that got rhinos in the future wouldn't have known where to start. Clara lived for a month at Versailles. And from that, the keepers there learned how to care for a rhino. All of it was trial and error, and luckily for them, a lot of the trial stuck around. And the error wasn't too bad, although the saddest part for me is they thought that rhinos would live 100 years. And when Clara died around 20, they were devastated. They thought that they had done something wrong. So what happened to her? Well, she was a big girl when she died, over 5,000 pounds. And actually, it's hard to say what happened. She died in his stables in a London pub. And in 2023, on World Rhino Day, I went there. It was one of the most singular moments of my life. The horse in stables was the last known place that Clara was exhibited. I stood there on the London street and thought to myself, no one else in this city cares that in 1758, a Rhino Keeper walked down the steps of this tavern to open the door for his rhino to wow the crowds, and she wasn't moving. No one else cared in that moment but me. And on World Rhino Day, when there's only 5 species left on the planet, and 2 of those species have fewer than 100 left, I thought, what better way to spread the emotion that I feel about this animal than to get this dang book published? I have to. And today, just by talking about the legacy of an animal that lived over 200 years ago in this room, we are allowing for the keeper's emotions and that animal's legacy to still live. The art allows her to live, and I think, I might be wrong, but I think that I have found her remains. If you see this skeleton here, that is on display at the Grant Museum in London. I called them and had a really nice conversation with the curator there when I was drafting my book. I said, hi, I know you have a really old rhino skeleton, and I'm hoping you can tell me some more information about it. And I told them what I was doing. They said, yes, the rhino skeleton is at least 200 years old. Yes, we think that it's female. No, we don't have any more information because a lot of our records were destroyed during the Blitz. They cannot confirm nor deny, based on all of their records, that that is Clara or it isn't. But what other rhino was there, right? My heart of hearts holds out that it is her. But here's the thing that's missing, her horn. In a few of the illustrations that I have found of her, Dowey is holding her horn in his hand. We do not know how it was removed or why. All we know is at one point she was scheduled to show up in Italy at an appearance and she didn't show up. 2 months later, she's in Rome with no horn. The answer could be complicated, but to me it's pretty simple as to what happened to the horn. Wherever Dowey is, it is. There's no record of it selling anywhere. There's no record of it in any museums. And museums that often hold rhino horns, they put replicas on display because they're one of the most highly stolen artifacts in museums. They are worth more than gold per ounce. Rhino horn doesn't do anything. It's kind of gross. It's like keratin. And if you ever get to feel a rhino horn, it feels like a bazillion little hairs that are just fused together and hard. There's no medicinal properties in a rhino horn. It doesn't cure poison, but unfortunately, for thousands of years, Chinese medicine has said that it does. People still harvest rhino horns in poaching today. It's really sad. So, my theory of what happened to Clara is all in the book. You can go on that journey with a modern character that I wrote, who's kind of based on me, and based on me in the fact that I had this undying curiosity that once I finished the end in 1758 in this book, I thought, but wait, what happened to her? So I wrote a museum intern. And she has to figure out where Clara is and what happened to her through a series of documents, artifacts, pieces of art. That adventure is the second timeline in this novel. So you get to see all of that unveiled to you in The Rhino Keeper. So what really happens? Well, you have to read the book. But what happened to me? Well, my book has become my publisher's bestseller. And I'm here in Kansas, writing more, raising my child, loving this place, with no plans of ever leaving. It means a lot to me that Clara's legacy lives on 265 years after her death. It's like she won't ever truly be gone, and neither will any of the animals that we've fallen in love with. I think about my sheep and goats from 4-H all the time. And within these walls of the Museum of World Treasures, you will find so many similar stories. Stories of presidents' signatures, cuneiform tablets, a Roman coin collection that started a museum, fossils from Kansas, a piece of the Berlin Wall, things that make us shake our head and say, that's here in Kansas? I think if the founder of this museum, Dr. John Kardatsky, was given the opportunity, he would have done the exact same thing that Douwe Vandermeer did. Why? Because Dr. John and Captain Vandermeer shared the same thing, the passion to instill wonder in us all. Thank you so much. I am also open to questions. That guy. I'm going to keep this one.
Again, if you have a question, and I will bring the microphone to you so everyone can hear. Got any questions for Jillian?
Hi.
Is the book child-friendly?
No. However, there are two wonderful picture books about Clara that are child-friendly. My 16-year-old niece read it and said that she wished that she would have waited 2 years. But the two picture books, I can link you to them. They are absolutely wonderful and they're illustrated. So yeah, thank you for that question. Yes, because the cover is so colorful, I think that some people have thought that it was child-friendly and then they get halfway in and they're like, oh, that's a murder. So yes.
How long do rhinos normally live?
They live about 40 years. It depends on if they're in captivity or in the wild, but average is about 40. There was one that just passed away and she was in her 50s. That's pretty rare. But yeah, when they thought that Clara was going to live to be 100, they just were ignorant to that. But if you think about it, if she had a really poor diet and lived to be in her 20s, it's actually not bad, right? So yeah, 30 to 40, sometimes into 50s.
So,
Yes.
first you alluded to more writing. Would you like to?
Remember that cute, yeah, that little cute porcelain rhino that I was like, oh my gosh, that's so cute. So when I was researching and writing the Rhino Keeper, there's one chapter about a porcelain maker named Johann Candler. And I didn't know anything about porcelain before I started doing research for this book. And the amount of research I had to do, because Clara went to so many places and saw so many people, was a lot. But when I found this porcelain maker, it was another head-shaking moment for me. This man was basically the founder of European porcelain. And there was a mad king that held him captive until he could produce an entire porcelain menagerie. But the trick was he wanted it life-size. You cannot make life-size porcelain animals. It explodes in the kilns, and they did not know that. So my second book is called The Porcelain Menagerie. It is a companion to the Rhino Keeper. Clara makes an appearance at the very end of the book. And it's essentially the story of that king, his kingdom, and his mistress named Fatima. Another historical mystery I uncovered within that book was that this king had over 300 mistresses. He was not the most pleasant human. But in his will, the only woman that he left any money to was one mistress named Fatima. I could not figure out why, and I said, I've got to figure this out. I have to write this book. So you will learn about the porcelain, the way that it was made in the early 1700s, the secrecy in the factory that was held in a massive castle. It's very dark, gothic, animal-filled, feminine rage. It's not as light and fluffy as the Rhino Keeper, but I had to write it once again because I just couldn't get it out of my brain. My third book is done. My fourth book is brewing right now. I have a massive map of it in my head, and I wrote it on a poster board that I can't read because my handwriting is crazy. So that one is being planned, and then my third one, it's probably going to be out next year. So, yeah.
And then my other question was just because I find it really interesting that your path from college to public history, being an author, and then I know with the announcement or in my introduction, we also talked about you being a local business owner. So can you just tell the audience about that? I find it really interesting that you do all of these.
Yeah, so in 2007, when I was at McPherson, I needed a part-time job, and I walked into a bridal store. Back then it was called Carrie Lenz in downtown McPherson. Now it's called Brooklyn and Company. I just needed a part-time gig, and I worked 3 years there in college, and then when I moved to Wichita, I applied at every single bridal store in town. I needed, a job as a grad school girly, and I hadn't yet gotten my, I ended up getting a teaching assistant job at Wichita State. But every single weekend I was working at the bridal store. And even when I was here at the museum, the owner of the bridal store then was like, hey, can you come in this weekend? And I said, absolutely, sure. I've always loved working with brides. And so the really weird way that the world works sometimes is that the things that you don't expect, things that are your back burner, often become your main gig. And now I own the bridal store that I worked at 14, and I started there in 2010, and so it's been 15 years. It is Dress Gallery in Delano, and we are proudly sponsoring the tuxedos for the staff, yes, for the gala next weekend. So we're still involved. Yeah, you can always pop by and see me down in Delano. Yes, I see a question over there. Sure. That's a great question. So a lot of people research first and then they write. But what I found, because this is basically like a road trip of Europe, that if I did that, I would forget all of the little tiny details from the cities and the real people that are included in this. So I researched and I wrote at the same time. My timeline was like this. I got the idea in 2020. In 2021, my brain boiled on it. Mid-2021, I got the courage to contact the only person who'd written a book about Clara. Her name is Glennis Ridley, and she's the kindest human. She's a professor of English at the University of Kentucky, and I said, hi, I'm obsessed with your book. I'm going to write a novel. And I'm like, this is not going to work out. She's never going to respond. Not only did Glennis respond, but she said, it's been 20 years since I wrote that book. Here are all of the things that I've discovered since then. She and I bonded together. She was an early reader for this book. She blurbed this book. So on the back, you can see her praise for it. And basically, from all of the things that have been digitized from when she discovered this story until when I started writing it, I was able to create my own Clara folder of all of the research that I needed. I spent most of 21 formulating all of those research pieces together and piecing together that art map that I was talking about. And then in 2022, I started writing in earnest, and I finished writing the book in 6 months while I was going back to my resources and researching at the same time. Like little details, like what color were the walls at Schönbrunn where Maria Theresa lived? I'm not going to remember that, if I researched it a year ago. So I have to look all of these things back up. I went on a lot of YouTube tours, which is really fun. You can go on YouTube tours to almost anywhere in the world, and people will just take you around with their GoPros or their cameras and show you the inside of palaces and castles and cities. And then I was actually lucky enough, like I said, to go to London, and I went to Versailles, to their private library, where I was able to look into their menagerie things. So those things were really exciting for me. So essentially, to actually write this book, it took me about 18 months. Now for the porcelain book, it only took me a year. For my last book, it only took me 6 months. I was amazed by that one. Maybe writing something in chronological order instead of both of my other books being back and forth timelines means that I write faster. Novel idea to do something normal. So now I'm kind of a book a year girl. My next book has 5 timelines spread out from the 1400s until the 1910s. So it's taking me a lot longer to get through that one. But yeah, essentially I finish about a book a year, research and writing together.
I just want to share, if anybody's interested in going to the zoo in Wichita, you can get a free pass at the public library.
Amazing. Yes, I highly encourage you to do that. And I highly encourage you, when you do go, hang out for a little bit around the rhinos. I don't think that the rhinos get enough attention or love, honestly. Hang out, watch them get the zoomies, watch them wallow. They'll show you their belly buttons. They're really cute. They really are. Now at Tanganyika, you're going to see the Indian rhino species, and at Sedgwick County Zoo, you're going to see a black rhino. They are distinctly different from each other. KJ at the Sedgwick County Zoo is a little special because he's got 3 horns right now. Not normal, it's probably a recessive gene. But the other rhinos you will see called the greater one-horned because they have 1 horn. Yes. Any other questions for me? Hi, yes, Kayla, hi. You cannot pre-order the porcelain menagerie yet. When can I have it, she says. Okay, so I actually have a really exciting trip coming up. I am going to Dresden and Meissen, Germany for my cover reveal and my book launch. The cover and the book pre-order link will be live from Meissen, Germany. I get to go tour the factory where Meissen porcelain is made, and I also get to see the castle where it started, which is a 9th century castle called Albrechtsberg, where all of the porcelain makers had kilns in the basement, which probably wasn't the safest place, but that's what they did. So that is actually late May. I cannot wait. The cover is insane. And it, being an author who gets 2 books from the same publisher within the same, span of time is really just a blessing. I'm so fortunate to have found my publisher for that kind of thing. But yeah, so late May, watch out for castle pics. I'm gonna overload you, and I get to see how porcelain is made. I cannot wait for that. I'm gonna be in the back for more questions, signing books. There are also books in the gift shop. So if you would like to buy them down there, that's where you need to do that. If you brought your own book, I'm happy to sign it today. And if you have any more questions for me, you can always reach me on contact. I have a very active newsletter, so if you would like to be part of that to see, because the cover reveal is going to be in the newsletter before it's anywhere else, if I can stand it. Because hello, I get to go to a castle. So if you want to join my newsletter, the sign-up sheet is back there for that. And I will be having a launch at Watermark in the fall. So yeah, thanks everybody. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jillian. Like she said, make sure to pick up a copy of her book in the gift shop if you'd like one. Take your time asking her questions as we're cleaning up this space. And thank you all for coming this morning. And we hope to see you all at the next one. And get your tickets to the gala, April 26th. If you'd like to go, it'll be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I'll be there. See you there, friends.
Thank you all and have a great day.